in our tradition, in the Episcopal tradition, where we do ordination, so we're making a priest, God is making, and we're bearing witness to what God's doing in this ordination. God's making priest, God makes a deacon, bishop. One of the lessons that is very popular is, and it's in two places in the gospel, but it is about Jesus saying to his followers who are experiencing some doubt about everything Jesus is saying. I mean, they have some real questions about this. It seems really hard. They're concerned about whether it's even doable, and they're really pretty sure that they're not the ones to do it. And Jesus says, in the midst of that conversation, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Pray to the Lord of the harvest in the King James Version, which I really like because it says pray, but you could say ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the field to do the work, in that kind of gospel way, to put your shoulders at the gospel plow in God's kingdom and begin to do God's work. And so one of the things I think that often comes to us in the midst of this is, how are we supposed to do that? What does that look like? And I want to say that I believe that God is breaking us open to see a variety of different ways in which we can create Christian communities and go out in the world to discover where God is, to be with God in that, to break bread with God in that, to be and create. And so I imagine a future church with many different kinds of Christian communities. Some of them are going to look like the church many of us go to today. Those are not going to go away. I really believe that those have a place and are a great gift to the community and the culture in which we find ourselves. And in fact, they have huge resources and have the ability, if used well, to disperse themselves out into the community in ways that startups have a harder time doing. But it is to take on the work of starting these Christian communities. So as we are discovering, we've talked about this, discovering what God's doing in our relationship and in our world, as we are discovering God out there, we are going to begin to make these new Christian communities, and they can be of all kinds. We talked in an episode about people going out and working in a prison and creating a community in prison. Talked about a house church. We've talked about a lot of forms. There are people doing this in nursing homes, and I'm not talking about going and seeing them in the afternoon. I'm talking about making community where the people in that community care for one another and share in the Bible teaching and break bread. I mean, going out and doing all kinds of work out in the world.
And franchise it so that then you can bring the money back.
Well, and that's the whole point, right? Is for me to be able to figure out how to make money off of this.
Well, that's church growth, though, right?
Church
you
growth.
Create these franchising, and then you have a
church growth in the way that has been popularized, and congregational development with it, is all about maintaining an old economic model about how church works. What God is doing in God's Spirit in the midst of the churches today, denominational and non-denominational alike, is breaking us open to start new Christian communities and to be out work in the world where God's working. And so we're going to have to set aside that all those linear models, all those have-to-dos, and all of that stuff that we thought was so important, which was really about sustaining an old idea of church, which is a good idea and still has some value. It's just not the only thing that has value. But it is not to grow so that we can sustain the economic model of the church. And so one of the key pieces of this is to understand, if I receive the invitation and say, yes, I accept this, I'm going to be vulnerable, and I go out into this volatile, uncertain world of ambiguity and complexity with, I don't know, I'm going to experiment, I'm curious about what's happening, and we go setting off on that model. The purpose is not to recreate where we came from. It's to find God out in the world and begin to nurture what God's harvest there. And I like the image from that story about how God is praying for us. I like the idea. Pray with me. I'm praying. We're all
God's
praying.
praying with us?
Praying with us to send that laborers would
That's
go
awesome.
out, right? And then on top of that, we might say, well, where are some other stories about what this is supposed to be like? And so one of the stories that I think I'm going to get this wrong, but it's the story of the sower. And so what is a laborer in God's field supposed to look like? And what we do with that story typically is to say, we're the sower of the kingdom. We're going to throw seed. We're supposed to throw it out there. And some of it's going to fall on some rock, and some birds are going to come over there, and they're going to eat it. It won't grow there. Some of it's going to be in the rock. Some is going to be on good soil. It's going to grow well there. Some is going to be on good soil, but then it's got some weeds nearby, and they're going to come get the thing. And the tradition of the church for a long time is to interpret that as we're the sower, and all you have to do is go out and sow these seeds liberally. God will bring the growth, and those. I think that story has meaning for people, and God promises that is going to be an incredible harvest. But I really wonder about that.
Drive-by incarnation?
Yeah. Well, I've begun to think that C.S. Lewis and some others may have it right, that God's the sower. That God's the sower, and that the seeds that are being sown, and this is really present in a number of different interpretations, but that the seeds that are being sown are Jesus out in the world. And God is sowing Jesus out in the world. And maybe the laborer is supposed to shoo away the birds. Maybe the laborer is supposed to pick up the stones and nurture the plant. Maybe the laborer is supposed to come along, and when the heat of the day comes, to shield it. Maybe the laborer is supposed to tend that field and pull the weeds and water the plants. And maybe the laborer is supposed to partner with that sower, putting Jesus out there, and figure out what that is and what that work is. And so as we think about this work of beginning new things, what we want to think about is how are we to tend this field we've been called into, where Jesus has already been planted, and where there are plenty of birds and stones and rocks and vines and everything ready. And how do we tend it in such a way that Jesus might take root like an oak of Lebanon, that great image from Scripture, this great oak whose roots are just down into this idea of Jesus as an oak of Lebanon, deeply rooted in this place. How can we help that to grow and take root in the midst of our community? And so I kind of like to think of God's praying for us to go do that work, to do that kind of creative nurturing in the world. And so what that begins to do is undermine that somehow we're doing an economic job, or somehow we're just kind of busting out a new economic way, or that this is business, or no, we're like rolling up our sleeves and helping to grow this baby Jesus out there in the world. It's taking root and tending it, and that's in people's.
If I don't win, and like.
No.
I mean, it's
what
like if Jesus is a seed, it might be good. Like the word actually may not come back void.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That God's mission's successful all of a sudden. Right, all of a sudden you begin to say, wait, I'm not in charge of the seed. I'm not even really in charge of the growth. My partnership to be there while it's happening, and to do what I can to nurture, and to say, throw some seeds up. Wait, there are I thought the seeds were, I see the seeds over here now. I mean, it's to open our eyes to see what God's doing in the world around us in that amazing way. That's just it's a different way of thinking about it. And it breaks it out of the old church models or the old religious models in a very, very helpful way that's a way filled with grace and not performance.
Actually, it sounds like real growth and not growth mass success.
Yeah, it's God's sustaining growth and God's creative growth and God's action as opposed to ours. We're just enjoying and participating in the event, in the work. some way.